How are you finding Kigali?
Good.
Is this your first time?
No, it's my fourth time.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I mean, so I know when you just said that normally when you come it's tight schedules, but and did you have time on any of your visits to kind of like go around and see places and meet people?
Yeah, I did. My first time in Rwanda is a long time ago. It was in 2012, 10 years ago.
Wow,
That was the first time I came.
that's a long time.
And the reason I came was there was a young entrepreneur who had a biogas enterprise across a set of villages about an hour and a half's drive north from here. So I definitely spent some time understanding the country a little bit because I had to spend a whole day, a good few hours getting there, a good few hours spending time with her and the people that she works with and the people that her work has benefited, to understand that. I remember that very, very clearly. And I definitely got to see some of the country, spend time in the city. And if you came to Kigali 10 years ago and you think about Kigali today, it's a lot has happened.
What are some of the things that you think have changed?
I guess the thing that's most observably clear is sort of planned development. I don't know how else to say that, but you kind of get a sense that everything is unfolded according to a plan, right? So you drive around and there are these roads that seem really well planned and things are happening in a way, and there's stuff that is new, but it didn't feel like it just mushroomed up without a plan. It's kind of coming together. So I would say that's the headline that I have of having seen Kigali, pretty much every 2 years or so over a decade.
What can other countries, from the continent, learn from them in terms of giving entrepreneurs an opportunity to flourish?
So first, yes, this is my thing. Very young entrepreneurship specifically, and entrepreneurship education, and how you move from education, either high school or university, into entrepreneurship without necessarily having a job in between. That's what I'm really passionate about figuring out. I would say the thing that a lot of people can learn from Rwanda is just the reduction of red tape. They do things to say, there are things that you want to do. We're going to do what a government is supposed to do, which is remove barriers to economic growth. That's not only in entrepreneurship, that's in all things, right? So if you think about how relatively easy it is to arrive here as a foreigner from another African country and you want to do business, you can hop on a plane. A little while ago, there would have been a small visa fee on arrival. I think most of the times now you can just arrive. That's making it easy to be an entrepreneur, either from another country that wants to come to Rwanda and do stuff. And I'm sure their policies that are supporting Rwandese entrepreneurs are similarly friendly.
How did you get into entrepreneurship?
I was a very young entrepreneur. So similar to you, can I ask you how old you are now?
Yeah, I'm 23.
Okay, so when I was a little bit younger than you, 19, I was in my first year of university, and I started a side hustle, just like many students have. And I was fortunate enough that by the time I left university, that side hustle was a big enough business where I didn't have to go and find a job. I could do that, and I did it with a friend, and then we built a very meaningful small business together for the next 13 years. So we built a business that employed a bunch of people and gave us a lot of, both reward and headache, as all entrepreneurship journeys are. And I was then fortunate enough to be able to have choices about what I wanted to do after that. And I wanted to help other entrepreneurs, and I found the African Leadership Academy and African Leadership Group.
So what type of business were you doing with your friend?
So I was a computer science student, but I was also a musician.
Oh, wow.
So I made music with computers. I was a producer, but I was also a guitarist. So I kind of blended that stuff. But the business wasn't music. I created a magazine about the music industry, and I used my computer science skills to create an online magazine with a lot of interactivity. This is really a long time ago, like 1999 or something. So the internet was very different then. You couldn't just sort of boot up a website on some hosted platform for free. You had to put in a little bit of work. So we built. Our first business was an online magazine about the music industry, and the way we made money was selling advertising. And what was interesting though is that we then built technology that ran that magazine really well online. And then people with really big magazines, like business magazines, I think said, it seems like you run a really good online website for magazines. An online magazine platform. Could we buy what you have to run our magazine? And that became the much more meaningful business. And I think like all things, it then evolves. So then there were other products and services that came out of that. And one of those that came out a couple of years later was an email marketing platform. And that was the thing that we got the most success from. So it shows you all businesses start somewhere. And if you're a founder, you keep iterating and iterating, and you go where the market tells you. And if you work hard and get a bit of luck, it works out.
So you used to compose music.
Yeah.
Are you passionate about music?
Yeah.
And then, so you started a magazine that speaks about music.
Yes. It was about how to be successful in the music industry.
So you formed a business from something that you loved.
Absolutely.
And so how does passion and starting something relate, right? Because at times people might think that passion is overrated because, well, it can get you started, but how long can it keep you going during the hard times?
Oh, I love this question because I think people confuse passion and skill. So to be passionate about the arts doesn't mean you have to be an artist. Okay?
Yeah.
To be passionate about music doesn't necessarily mean you're an excellent musician. You can be. But you can build a skill that is in demand. In my case, it was computer science. And you can apply an in-demand skill to your passion. Right? And I think that's a better recipe for success than where they're the same thing. Okay? I think a lot of people, they really love something, but they're really good at something else. And they try to then be good at the thing they love instead of be successful at the thing they're good at. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. Wow. Oh, that's interesting.
So, yeah, I think as people navigate their careers, this intersection of what you're really interested in and the skills you need to be successful in the world, you need to be a little bit more intentional about that intersection.
So sometimes if you're interested in something and there's something else that you're good at, you suggest it's better to build a business from something you're good at and become even better at it.
No, I think you can build a business that services and has a direct response to your passion. So for example, let's say your skill is writing. Okay. So are you passionate about writing and literature, or are you just really good at writing? And maybe you're passionate about the arts, right? You can write about the arts and find a career that uses your skill as a writer, but you're not an artist in the traditional sense of a painter or a playwright or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a way where you could do. Here's a good example, right? So maybe there are very limited opportunities for actors in the world of theater in Africa, for example, where you can make a meaningful career. But maybe if you're an excellent writer, you could become the head of communications for the theater, right? Every day you're writing about things you're passionate about. You're deploying the thing you're really good at, which is a written skill. And you're promoting the thing you care about most, which is the arts. So I think that's where things get a little interesting and this is a comment on careers broadly. It's not only about entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
But entrepreneurship is still about solving problems, right? You find something that is an opportunity to take advantage of or a problem to solve, and you deploy all your skills to solve that problem for other people who are willing to pay you for it. That's ultimately the definition.
So it's about finding an intersection between what you're good at and what you're passionate about.
And a problem that needs solving.
And a problem. I mean, some people will try and create a solution and then go back and find a problem, which is...
Yeah, it's interesting the way you frame it that way. I think it's the intersection of those three things. If you want to be successful and happy, okay, as an entrepreneur, if you can say, I found a problem worth solving that other people want me to solve and think I'll be good at solving. I have the skill, or am prepared to learn the skill to solve that problem. And there's a way to link how I do that to something I'm passionate about. If you can combine those three things, I think you are likely to stay the course through the hard times, because you'll get sort of fuel from one of the three areas. You'll either get through a hard time because you were passionate and you just want to make sure you still love it, or you'll get through stuff because you're just being successful, even if you don't like it right now, but you're being successful, so therefore it gives you energy. And then you're deploying your skill. You're good at the thing you're doing. You're getting recognition for how good you are. So I think that intersection, probably the holy grail.
Yeah, it sounds so. Why young entrepreneurs?
Because very young entrepreneurs are completely underinvested versus the potential they have to contribute to the continent's future, the world's future.
And over, I think, 11 years working with young entrepreneurs, what is something that you have found that these entrepreneurs share in common? Is there anything that they share in common?
Yeah. I think they're much more willing to be wrong and to learn. And I think when you're young and you take on entrepreneurship and you do it with some friends, there's something about coming together as a team of young people like that I think is really exciting. And I think very young people are uniquely able to do that. The reason is that there's not, it sounds terrible, but there's not that much to lose, right? So let's say I started a business today, right? I have 2 children. I have like things that I have to take care of. So if I chose a team of friends today to start a business, we'd have quite a big negotiation before we started about what's in it for me and is it going to work and a whole range of things. Whereas my 23-year-old self and you would probably have a chat and we'd just give it a try.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, I'll find a new friend and try it again, right? So I think that's what very young entrepreneurs have going for them. I think they're kind of just trying to find a bunch of people to do something really cool with. And because that's what they're seeking, I think they're just more willing to experiment until they find it the correct thing.
And well, young entrepreneurs have less to lose, as how you say it. So it's like I usually tell my friends that right now we have the most amount of space that we can get to try, fail, try again and fail, and just, keep on trying until it works out, because our risk is really small compared to the next 10 or 5 years down the line, because the risk is going to be maximum. So we're going to be extra careful. And I think being an entrepreneur, sometimes you just have to be bold and, be ambitious and do crazy things.
Completely. But it doesn't feel less risky at the time. Like, no matter what age you are or anything else, like every decision that is a life decision feels like the biggest decision you're going to make at that time, right? So it's not to diminish how important those decisions are, but as you say, the consequences, even though they'll feel exactly the same, it'll feel devastating if it doesn't work when you're 21, and it'll feel devastating if it doesn't work if you're 40. but the reality of the impact of that failure is smaller, and your ability to recover as a younger person is much stronger. You can bounce back so fast.
So you spoke about how when a young person has an idea, I'll just probably get a group of friends and they'll go for the idea, but you didn't say they're going to go for the idea themselves, right? That means a team has a huge role to play when it comes to bringing an idea from, the idea stage all the way to the execution stage. But over the course of the years, I've seen a lot of ideas fail simply because of the team that these people have created, right? So what is the best way for young entrepreneurs to create team, in as much as, it's your friends, but how do you create a team that is functional and really does the work that they're supposed to be doing and maybe, having fun down the line?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you have to go into entrepreneurship in maybe two ways. So the one is if you found someone or a group of people that you really enjoy working with, then you need to find the thing that you're going to do together that you all are excited to do. That's the initial challenge, right? Because your primary motivation has been, these are the people. It doesn't actually matter what the idea is as much as working with these people, right? Which I think and it's likely that you will, because you like working together and you've got shared dreams and those sorts of things, it's likely that it'll be quite similar. But I find that those kinds of groupings of friends, or it's easier to pivot because you can go, if we're honest with ourselves, this idea was terrible. And we're all unhappy. Why don't we try this other idea? And then you can kind of come to that. I think the other kind, where it's less about the people, it's about the opportunity or the challenge, right? So like at ALU, you're choosing missions, not majors, right? So instead of choosing 3 people that you really like to work with, you're actually choosing people who want to save the same or similar problem to you. But maybe you actually don't like each other at all. Okay, but you will get through those things because you are deeply passionate about
the same thing.
So I don't think I think the reasons teams fail is, so one, there's a bunch of people who come together as friends and they actually just want to hang out, but the idea was terrible and therefore the thing fails, right?
Yeah.
And then they're not willing to give it a bash again, right? Because actually working together isn't really what they want to do for the rest of their lives. They just want to stay friends. And the other way is where you can't agree on the best way to solve the problem. And then you maybe go your separate ways. And that's all okay. We're going to have to, as very young entrepreneurship becomes increasingly a way forward for more and more people, which it will be, there's no doubt about it, we're going to have to become as good at shifting between teams and finding the team that we really want to work with quite quickly as we would with maybe changing jobs for the first few years. I think people are like, oh, I'll spend a year doing this because I want to learn that, and then another 2 years training here, and then because I want to get here. So maybe we need to be a little bit less precious about these early years and consider it entrepreneurship training, where we're learning how to be in teams and moving around.
Oh, so you spoke about how, being flexible to, change ideas and move around. And when do you know that the idea you have either needs persisting or pivoting?
How long is a piece of string, So, sorry, that's a terrible answer. I think so all the entrepreneurship courses that you'll ever do or programs you'll go on will talk about product market fit, right? Sometimes you hit it really quickly and sometimes you never find it. I think entrepreneurship as a skill set, you become more and more experienced at knowing whether that's going to come, that product market fit, and in how long. It's one of the major skills you learn over time, right? So maybe for the first while you'll bat your head for a really long time because you just love the idea so much, and your advisors will keep telling you, I don't think you're going to get here, and you're going, I'm going to get here, I will do this, it's going to work. And then the next time you try, you're a bit wiser and you'll know more quickly. So yeah, we just have to recognize that these are some of the skills that an entrepreneur needs to build, which is how to know when to stop or pivot or those sorts of things, or how to surround yourself with people that help you make those decisions well.
I think that's an important one, because as an entrepreneur, when you come up with an idea, it becomes like your little baby, right? So it's really hard to let go. And it's good to have people who can, advise you around and tell you when to stop and when not to. And it's also good for you to be able to think that for yourself, right? So what role do mentors play in that regard?
Oh, massive. And this is where I'm really, I guess, passionate is the word. I think a lot of adults are failing young people in supporting some choices they're making about how to spend their energy. Let me put it this way. What I mean is, so let's take yourself, right? You're surrounded by this enabling environment right now at ALU, and let's say without having some people to engage or test it, you ran really hard down a direction with an idea for which there was no market. But you loved this idea, but someone didn't tell you. I'm not saying it's your fault at all. I'm saying someone who knew didn't tell you that within the next 2 years, some regulation in the country in which you're going to operate this idea is about to change, which will kill your idea. Okay. So I think there's a lack of information sharing from very critical adults in young people's lives, parents and teachers primarily, who are not helping people be successful enough in the choices they make when it comes to choosing an entrepreneurship path. So there are industries and sectors that are growing, and there are industries and sectors that are not. And most parents and teachers' views of that information is dated. So they might be very supportive of an idea and even encourage one where the likelihood of your success is lower than if you just put that same energy in a slightly different direction. And that's what I really want to start improving. I think we owe it to young people who are being brave enough to be entrepreneurs to give them better information to say, if you're going to run this hard and take so much risk and put it all on the line to create work for yourself and others, let's at least give you enough information to increase the likelihood of your success. And I think we're failing you. And that's what Anzisha is trying to do, the program I work with. We're not only about supporting young people, we're trying to influence all the people that are supposed to support young people who choose to be entrepreneurs better to do that work well.
So for our listeners who don't know what Anzisha is, do you mind, giving them a brief explanation on what Anzisha is and the goal and what you aim to achieve?
Thank you. Yeah. So the Anzisha Prize started over a decade ago. Very simple idea. We were going to find really innovative young African entrepreneurs across the continent, celebrate their stories, and by doing that well and consistently over a really long time, other young people would look at these stories and follow in their footsteps. So it's called the demonstration effect. It's why the Nobel Prize exists for peace or sciences. The idea is that by celebrating someone who broke it peace, right, and giving them the Nobel Prize, you're hoping other young people all over the world are going to go, this is a good thing to do. I'm also going to broker peace in my own way wherever I see it. Or I'm going to go for the Nobel Prize for science or economics because someone has recognized you or recognized excellence, and you can see what that is, and you can see yourself in that, right? But there was nothing that was recognizing very young people for excellence in entrepreneurship, right? No one was giving really young people huge amounts of money and saying, good job. It was just celebrating much older examples. So I think it's much more inspiring to see someone in their mid-20s who's been successful, like really close to where you are, than, your attention continuing to aggregate to these big Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. It's not that that's wrong. It's just that it's not helpful enough for enough people to say, I can be like that. So that's why the Anzisha Prize started, right? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we did that for a decade, and we've got about 200 really exceptional stories now. And we do a lot of work to promote those stories. And there's clear evidence that in the countries where Anzisha fellows have been successful and found success, there are other young people following in those footsteps without us doing anything. And that's called the demonstration effect. Okay, so that's really exciting, and we're going to continue doing that for as long as we find the support, which I hope will be forever. But then as you do things, you learn other things, right? So then we started to realize, oh my word, money doesn't trust young people. Like, people with money don't trust young people with it. So how do we influence investors to invest younger? Then we're like, oh, every time we talk to parents, they keep dissuading their kids from being entrepreneurs. They want them to be other things. So we better start talking to parents about helping their kids make better decisions, or not being afraid of the decisions they might make in the world that they're going to find themselves. And then we started to go, oh, geez, if you take most teachers, they're completely ill-equipped to support a 15, 16-year-old who shows entrepreneurship potential to make that kind of career choice. They're actually going to maybe encourage them in other directions. So what can we do to help them? And then if you look finally at the sort of policy space, the worlds of education and entrepreneurship, policy at the levels of government, they're colliding, right? Education is a little bit irrelevant to the market, and entrepreneurship is battling for talent. So they're coming together, these huge sort of icebergs. And we wanted to get both those icebergs to think about, to not forget very young entrepreneurs while they collide. And that's the work we do.
I am a young entrepreneur from either Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, or whatever part from the continent. How do I apply for this program?
It's very simple. So every year applications open in about October. So it'll actually open in about 2 or 3 weeks. And you've got a couple of months to apply. Okay. So I think until the end of December. There are a number of ways to apply. You can apply in any one of 4 languages. We promise that it'll be read by a person who is a first language speaker of either English, French, Portuguese, or Arabic. You do have to apply online. There are some partners that we work with who also kind of, I guess, headhunt for talent or tell us about people that are entrepreneurs and so busy with their work that they're not looking up to go, maybe there's this thing called Anzisha I should apply for. So we get about 2,000 applications a year from across the continent, but we also get a few hundred nominations, and those are adults in schools or nonprofit or universities, those sorts of things, who then encourage people or tell us about them. And then we reach out to those young people and say, don't you want to apply? And then support them to do so. So that's how you apply. Oh, sorry, anzishaprize.org.
Anzishaprize.org, everybody. By the way, Anzisha is a Swahili word, yeah?
Yeah, it means to initiate or to start.
There you go. See, you can speak some Swahili.
Well, let's not overdo it.
So we spoke earlier about stories, right? And we spoke about how Nobel Prize celebrates people with the goal of inspiring other people to follow in their footsteps, right? And Anzisha is also trying to do the same thing. And I'm a huge believer in stories and the power of stories, right? And the role that they play in shaping the society and influence generations, right? So in as much as it's good to celebrate individuals who have achieved some things in the areas that they're working, how do we ensure that we are not only telling one side of the story? Right? In as much as we want to inspire a young entrepreneur to do whatever project they have been thinking of doing their whole life, but how do we also show them that there's also a possibility of failure?
It's a great question. I think there's a lot of pressure on programs like ours to do more failure storytelling, right? And I don't think we've done a particularly good job of it publicly. I think most people tell failure stories in trusted spaces, not on open platforms. And I think we have to respect that. So we have a long history of creating spaces for failure stories. So when you come to Anzisha as a fellow, every lunchtime during that 2-week period, someone comes in and tells a failure story. But it's not recorded. It's not public because there's a safety that's required on the part of the person who tells the failure story. Required, I think, for some people to do it authentically, right? Not everyone wants to be recognized for their failures. So I think there's something, you got to create space for failure storytelling, but in a way that doesn't make the person a poster child for failure. And I don't think any of us have got that right yet, because no one wants to be known as the guy who told, or the woman who told the failure story, right? They want to move past that and then be known for having recovered from the failure. They then found success. So I think that's where we're doing a bit better. So we now have this case studies program where we produce case studies for schools, and it positions a dilemma or a challenge that a very young entrepreneur got through, and it allows young people to think about how they would have got through the same thing. It's not a failure story, it's a challenge that you went through. But ultimately, this person has found success later, and I think that's important. One other thing I'll add is I think it's really, really important for young people who start as entrepreneurs to know that that doesn't have to be for life. So we have a couple of examples which I want to start telling the story of really well, where they started as young entrepreneurs, but then they found later success in other kinds of jobs. And the reason they're good at those jobs now is because they were trained as entrepreneurs. So, everyone thinks you have to have corporate experience before you become an entrepreneur. But maybe you can be the best manager of a nonprofit or the best this of that. And in a few years, we'll be able to know that a really good way to train for that later is to have been a very young entrepreneur. There's really important skills you learn. So I think... Sorry, there's a long way of saying we do have work to do on failure storytelling. I don't have the answer, but I think it's harder to do than people think because of the safety people require.
And I think most of the time it's like after you become successful, it becomes way easier for you to tell your stories. Well, so unless you have made it, you're probably gonna keep it low first.
Yeah, and we've got to respect people for that.
Absolutely. So we tell stories, right? We tell stories of African entrepreneurs, but still there's so much work to be done in terms of using African entrepreneurs, successful African entrepreneurs, to inspire young entrepreneurs. Right? Because most of the times when you ask people, the entrepreneurs they know, well, be the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerberg and the Bill Gates,
Yeah.
you'd hardly hear names such as, Fred Swanika or Tony Elmelu or Mohamed Deuji. And it's like we still have work to do in that regard too, and, create African entrepreneur heroes.
Yeah. I blame the media. I blame two locations of the media. The first is the Silicon Valley media for the past 30 years is probably the most powerful PR machine that's existed in business. They have done the most extraordinary job of positioning those entrepreneurs and that version of entrepreneurship as what it takes to be successful in the world. And if you think that that was an accident, you're not seeing the picture. So if you think about how many publications have popped up over time to track in lockstep the growth of the Silicon Valley entrepreneur, take the growth of TechCrunch and these other publications that we all go to and Disrupt and all these different things, right? Do you think those were accidents?
Wow.
That sector, those entrepreneurs built a PR machine that garnered global attention and caught everyone else napping. So that's point one. So we have to realize that as Africans, like we just didn't compete at all. Not only everywhere else in the world, no one told the story of entrepreneurship better over the last 30 years than a small group of people in Silicon Valley. Okay. At the same time, our media here have completely failed in their storytelling requirement. You know why? It is too easy to take a story that's already been well written by someone else and translate that. So let's say you're a very lowly journalist for a national newspaper. You've got a deadline for Friday, and someone says, write something on entrepreneurship. Are you going to go out and spend all your time finding the best entrepreneur in your city? Or are you going to write an op-ed on Elon Musk? What's easier?
Well, it's obviously Elon Musk.
Right. And your editor's going to go, that's fine, because people are going to open the paper. Is that right? No. We've got to fight back. So that's why there's a lot of philanthropy backing independent media, because we need independent media to support local storytelling in a way that actually provides social good. So I can see your brain is ticking. This has made you think a little bit. So I feel very strongly about this. This is why I work on the work that I do. It's a small, it's almost like shooting arrows at people with tanks. But Anzisha is trying to shoot arrows very carefully. We're trying to load our bows with exceptional stories. We work with local media to try and get them into places where young people will see them. But if someone could give me a bazooka instead of an arrow, I'd be really grateful. And we must also just recognize that the people who, that other people are going to serve their self-interest, right? It makes a lot of sense. We want venture capital from there. We want to model how we work and what we do from there. And I think we can be a little bit more selective.
No, I agree with you. Because that made me think too, because I never thought of, Silicon Valley being a powerful PR machine for the entrepreneurs from that side. But now I'm like, I understand the fact that we still have a lot of work to do in terms of rebranding Africa and in terms of storytelling in the continent. And seems like we have a long way to go, like a very long way to go. But I think it's important because right now, when you think about an individual like Elon Musk, right, successful entrepreneur, right, and then he would share his advice about entrepreneurship. But then when you come this side and you try to use his advice, it's different because the context that he's operating in and the context that you are going to be operating in, like these are two very different contexts.
Yeah.
And it's like when you have stories from African entrepreneurs, then, we can relate to them because they are able to become successful from the context that we also share.
Absolutely. So I think there's a big difference between liking a story and engaging a story. I think we all like the story of all these big Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. Like we actually click we click the like button. Okay, but to meaningfully engage in how they got there, it's exactly as you say. So, if you want, let's use e-commerce as the example. Not your generation, but my generation, okay, of entrepreneur, 20 years ago, which is when e-commerce and stuff started. Okay, so if I had an e-commerce idea, or 10 years ago, I was looking at eBay, Amazon, and stuff as the examples, okay? And even if I found support for this idea, those guys could depend on a few things and take them for granted that I don't think people think about it enough. First of all, credit cards and online payments worked. Second, if you sent a package from one part of America to another, the post office would actually get it there in less than a day for a very little amount of money. So then people come to different parts of Africa and they're like, we're going to build Amazon. It's 2014, right? And then they realize, oh, but hang on, there's no payment processing, so I have to build that. And hang on, there's no micro logistics network, so we'd have to build that. So then they don't actually run e-commerce businesses. What are they running? They're doing fintech and they're doing micro logistics. And having to build this. And they don't have anywhere near the amount of money that they need to build all three of those things, because when they went to the venture capitalists, they were like, we're going to build an e-commerce website. And we're expecting these sorts of returns. So my point is you're 100% right. So you've got to encourage young entrepreneurs. This is where I say adults are failing. Because the advice should be, no, help build the payment stack and help build micro logistics networks. that's where the opportunity is right now, right? And that's the responsibility you have, because people did that in these more mature markets a generation ago. The people who are going to make it easy on just the selling and the drop shipping and all that sort of stuff are going to come. It's after you.
Yeah.
So does that make it clear?
Yeah, it does. It does make it clear. And because the example you gave about Amazon, I think it's a very vivid example, because most of the times people will be like, you know what, it worked on this region, it's going to work on this region too. And then when they come, it's a total disaster. It's a total failure. So I think it's good also for other young entrepreneurs to be able to realize that, right? In as much as they're inspired by companies such as Amazon, but they're going to be operating on like totally different contexts. And it's like, okay, in as much as we like the idea, how can we find a way to implement it in our context, you know, on a different way, not the way they implement it, because, well, we are living in like areas that have like two different contexts, like very, very different.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you'll realize it. And as you're going, so you'll start an e-commerce company and you'll build the website, and then you'll realize I've got to do this other thing. So there's a good case study of this. There's someone who built an e-commerce website in the early days of the internet in South Africa, and they brought goods from overseas to South Africa in containers and then shipped them off. And then they realized they could just never make it big enough because of the failure in micrologistics. And then they built another company that aggregated all the courier companies in South Africa together, and they provided a service to small e-commerce stores to say, don't worry about the logistics. You just sell whatever you're selling, you put them in our warehouse, and we will get them out. And they aggregated all the courier companies together through they just aggregated it through some technology. And they built this really big business. But it took them a few years to figure out what the problem was they actually had to solve, right? They started solving one problem and then they realized it. And I think it's happening, you know. Look, the momentum on entrepreneurship in key verticals is significant, right? Fintech, micrologistics across Africa, it's really big. And I think young people are increasingly seeing it. Like, the market is moving. So it's easier today.
And speaking about fintech, East Africa, most East African countries will almost majority of the population, they use mobile money, right? Yeah. Compared to like using the credit cards. And it's like an innovation that really changed lives, because right now almost everyone has a mobile phone, right? Every adult and most young kids right now have mobile phones, so it's easy for them to be able to use mobile money compared to getting a credit card or opening a bank account. So it's good to see that young people are also creating innovations that are suitable for our circumstances, our situation, and our context too.
Completely, and that's why I say I think being a young entrepreneur right now is actually really exciting, because in most cases, someone has started to solve these underlying problems. And it's not, and we shouldn't overly focus on technology. There are other businesses that are really, really important that we need for our economies to grow. And we always go to the tech stuff because it's exciting and it's sexy. But I think there are people who are solving a lot of, let's just say, things like regional integration of tax laws. If you want to get goods from like Kampala to here or Nairobi to Kampala, like how does that all work, right? And I heard about this entrepreneur quite recently, and they've reduced all the costs for the entrepreneur who's just trying to sell. They've got some goods that this place next door really needs because they've done it, but the arbitrage was too high because of all the taxes and charges and whatever, and they've figured out how to massively reduce that. So now if you want to build something that manufactures a physical good, but in order for your business really to be viable, you need to be bigger than just in Kigali, and you need to go cross-border. Because let's be honest, Rwanda is a small market.
It's a small market. That's true.
You've got to, if you're going to build it here, like you've got to get your goods out. So there are people working really hard on harmonizing the law, customs, and it's moving faster than I think people realize. So, good time to be an entrepreneur.
A good time to be an entrepreneur. Everyone says right now Africa is the best place to be an entrepreneur, right? Because apparently we have lots of challenges and problems that young people can jump in and solve and tackle and become successful and help people, right? Like because they're solving problems. But a problem that most young entrepreneurs would say when they're getting into entrepreneurship is that they don't have funding, right? And it's like all over the place, right? It's like, well, I have this idea, but I don't have funding, right? And I don't think you believe that could be a main challenge or barrier for a young person to execute their ideas and become entrepreneurs, right? So what do you tell young entrepreneurs who think that they cannot get into entrepreneurship or they cannot bring the idea into life simply because they don't have enough funding to do that?
Yeah. So some students asked me this question yesterday, and I'm very clear about this. You need money to grow a business. I think young people are confused about where that money should come from. They think it should come from investors, and that's false. It must come from customers. I want to say it again. Getting funding for your business does not mean you have to raise money from investors. Yes, you need money, but the best way to get it is to convince someone to buy the thing you're going to make or the service you're going to provide, and ask them to give you some of that in advance and the rest on delivery, because that's the way you're most likely going to succeed. It's much better to prove that you're going to have a business that's going to succeed by convincing someone that you have a product they need than convincing a funder that there are all these other people that might want your product, and for them to give you the money. Then you still got to go find these customers and convince them to buy it. But then you're going to actually maybe not sell it to them for the correct price because you got this money from this other place. So, and I say this from experience. I built a very successful business, and I didn't raise a cent of money until 10 years later. And we just started selling what we could with the skills we had. We sold services, right?
Yeah.
And in every case, I managed to convince the person that I would deliver. They have to trust, right? And I think that's where something's gone wrong in the whole entrepreneurship money conversation. Go get it from the customer. And if you can't, you're going to fail anyway. Because that means your product isn't worth it, or the way you're positioning the service is wrong. And keep trying until you find the one customer who will give you that first sale. And if they trust you enough, there's definitely a way to create a form of, they don't have to give you everything up front. You just need enough for whatever your input costs are to demonstrate that you are going to give them what they eventually asked for. Right?
Yeah.
And I do appreciate there are some businesses where that's not possible, right? So if you're going for some huge idea, right? But this is where I think people also misunderstand the side hustle. I think there's an opportunity where you keep your big idea. Like, let's say you want to integrate all the payment platforms of East Africa, right? And then you go to funders and you're like, I need hundreds of thousands of dollars for 4 server farms and this much of this and these licenses and all that sort of stuff. That's great. But you have some skills that you can sell right now which will help you develop some of the things that you want to some other people who need some part of the world you're going to build, right? There must be one bank who needs you to build one little part of this, and they're willing to pay you to just do that work. That's your side hustle. It's solving a fraction of your bigger problem, right? A small part of it for someone who's willing to pay just for that bit. And then you build your way. If you're not finding success in your larger fundraising efforts, if that makes sense. I'm not negating fundraising. I just think a lot of young people have forgotten about where money originally came from. It's always come from customers. And we've completely evangelized the investor. I think it's a mistake.
I like the idea of starting small, and also Vusi Thembekwayo, if you are aware of him. One of the most famous videos that he made was start small while thinking big. And I think most of us, it's kind of the other way around, right? We just want to start big, and we don't even want to know if our customers are going to buy or not. So long we wake up when we think it's a great idea, it's like, boom, give us money, let's do this idea and see how it's going to turn out. So that's a problem again.
Yeah. He's right.
So when I mentioned his name, you nodded. I mean, he's a guy that you admire.
Yeah, for a range of reasons. He came to talk. He was a keynote speaker at Anzisha at the Gala Awards about, probably 6-7 years ago. So I had the opportunity to briefly talk to him. But I think the reason I admire him might be different to the reason you think. It's less about sort of his entrepreneurship prowess and the things he's done in fundraising. I just think we need more people who speak their truth. And I feel, even if you disagree with them at times, I think he's someone who speaks his truth. He has very clear opinions across funding, politics, and those sorts of things. And I think we have too many people who are too scared to speak their truth. And I work for African Leadership Academy. Our whole point is you must figure out how you want to lead, have agency in your opinions. And as much as I care about entrepreneurship, and that's my area of interest, I ultimately think the primary crisis we face in Africa is leadership, right?
Yeah.
That's why I work for a leadership institution, not an entrepreneurship one. I believe there's a bigger thing at play. And Vusi Thembekwayo is someone who I think has a leadership thesis, and I admire that.
So while still at him, one of the things that he does best is speaking, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Would love
Really
to be
good.
as good as that. Yeah, sure.
And with young entrepreneurs, you have to speak, right? Either to your customers or to investors. You just have to speak, right? You have to know how to speak, and you have to know how to tell your stories, right? So what are some of the things that young entrepreneurs can learn from him in terms of storytelling and sharing their vision and their ideas to the world and making them see what they see as their vision?
Oh, this is hard because I think we have to be careful about making everyone think they have to be an extrovert. And he is one. There are some very quiet entrepreneurs who've been wildly successful. Some are even reclusive, right? So I do think knowing how to tell your story is important. But I think the spectrum of the kinds of people we have in the world is too wide. And we've got to be quite careful. So I'm not negating that. I just want to create space for other kinds of success. So what do you do if you're someone who isn't a great storyteller and whenever you're asked to explain why you do what you do and you really battle, right? But your execution track record is off the charts. As a world, we're failing that person, and they will not. I mean, they could have such an impact if they're just left to do what they do, right? So I think this is why you need teams and partnerships. And I think you've got to recognize some of these things about yourself. And I think there's also there's strength in like being honest. So you can say, look, here's something I found, for example, with entrepreneurs. I think the pitch has actually been quite hurtful in understanding whether someone truly has execution capacity, right? Our contemporary education system or traditional education system values this ability to very quickly synthesize what you're up to. But if you interrogate that person, very quickly they have no idea, right? So I think it's fine as a young entrepreneur to start off by saying, look, I'm actually not the best at the pitch thing, but can you just ask me a bunch of questions and I'll answer anything you have? There's power in that. And I've seen a young entrepreneur do that. And they had 5 minutes it landed up being 25 and they got $200,000 at the end of the conversation. And the reason is that, and this was in, let's call it light manufacturing. It's like, and there's detail, and the investor knew what questions to ask. And the entrepreneur demonstrated, even though he was a very humble, quiet person who was not flashy at all, but he knew every equation, price point, stock management issue. He'd thought about machinery. He'd thought about all the different things that could go right and could go wrong. And it didn't matter what the investor asked, this person had the answer. That's why he got the money. So I just want, if there's young people who listen to this and they think they're entrepreneurial and they can deliver and they get work done, don't feel, find a way to either put the power in your shoes when you're in front of people so that you're able to demonstrate your strength, or find people that are good at the storytelling to help you. But don't feel you have to be everything to everyone. I think we're failing people with that.
That's a really good way to think about it.
Thank you.
It is, because see, even the mentality that I had was like, you know what, you have to be a good storyteller if you're an entrepreneur so that you can sell in front of people. But sometimes you don't have to be everything, right? You just have to be good at your craft and then work with other people who are good at their crafts, and then you create a strong team together.
Yeah. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a customer or an investor. The thing you're looking for most is evidence of execution. The proven ability to deliver, right? Show them the thing, or give them comfort that if they give you the problem, you've got all the things behind you to solve the thing. And back yourself in that way.
The proven ability to deliver. Most of the times, have you read a book called Built to Last?
Yeah, it's old.
It's really old.
Yeah.
So
it's older than me.
Yeah, it's an old book.
No, actually, it's not older than me. I don't think.
I mean, because some of the visionary companies they're speaking about are some of the companies that are already dying, such as Motorola. So it's a really old book. But I like the ideas that were presented in that book, right? And one of the things that I learned, which I find still fascinating to date, is the fact that idea doesn't really matter a lot, right? Because most of the times people think like, you know what, I have this great idea, I have to hide it from people so that they can't steal it from me, right? But as you said, it's like at the end of the day, what matters is your ability to deliver. So you can have a great idea, but so long the execution is not good, then some other people can beat you to it, right? So
yes.
I think it's also important for people to understand that ideas are good, necessary, but execution is even better, especially good execution.
Yes. I've got nothing else to add. Yes.
That's cool because, most of the times we feel like we have to add something when someone speaks, and, at times it's just like, yeah, I just agree with you. Nothing else to add.
I agree.
Cool. So seems like we are running out of time because it was supposed to be an hour. So on this podcast, we have a tradition of asking every guest 3 books that they read that influenced their lives or changed their perceptions about the world.
Oh.
So, over to you. What are 3 books that you read that made you see the world differently and you think young aspiring entrepreneurs should probably read, or young people, or anyone for that matter?
So, I'm embarrassed to say I don't read much. When I was younger, though, and when I was a young entrepreneur, I read quite a lot. But my memory is weak. So 2 are coming to mind, and hopefully a 3rd will come. The one that I think had a real impact on me in terms of the way I think about the ways to solve difficult problems with people, not people who are battling, like how do you solve difficult things, was something called the Medici effect. And it's a book about, so the Medici family in Italy, I don't know when, it's probably maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Anyway, they were patrons of the arts. And what they would do is they would invite different artists to come and I don't know where it was, but I think maybe live at their house or something, for a period. But the idea was they would invite different kinds of artists, and they would force those two different kinds of artists to co-create something. So like you would get a oil painter and like a sculptor of metal or something, and they would have to come up with something together or be in the same space. And I think, I don't know if it's true, but I think it's the book that made me hungry for and curious for diversity in my life. So I work at African Leadership Academy, probably the most diverse square kilometer of real estate in Africa. If you take, right, how many different nationalities are there and the kinds of interests people have, right? From an African perspective.
It's like 54 countries, yeah?
Well,
Represented?
in any given year, it's about 40 in any given year. But 40 African countries plus a smattering of international people. And when different skills and ideas collide, it's really amazing. So it's also about what happens if you come in with a different skill set. So I arrived at ALA and I came from a technology and a media background, but I came to a school. There was a whole bunch of stuff that was really easy for me because I'd been doing it for a long time. It's like being an oil painter. You just know how to paint with oil, right?
Yeah.
And now there's this guy who's battling to change the color of his metal. And you just understand color and paint in a way that the guy who's the metal sculptor doesn't know how to do. So it's like this is easy.
Yeah,
I'm
this
just
is
gonna do
easy.
this, right? So as an example, when I came to ALA and there was all sorts of stuff wrong with the IT network, I was like, but this is easy. This is what you just do this, and we can have it a better place. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. So, and I think that kind of diversity we have to encourage. And I think entrepreneurs who seek it will be more successful. So that's book one, The Medici Effect. And I think we have to be careful about homogeneity of ideas. Like, I think you've got to seek diversity in your life. It's probably my biggest lesson for anyone. Seek diversity in your life, you'll be a better human. And then the second book is more around like how to run a company well. And it's called The Rockefeller Habits. It's a really short book and basically talks about how to set up meetings and rhythms in a way that keeps everybody moving. It's like super practical. And I deployed that in my company when I was about 26. I read this book. I was like, okay, we're all going to do it. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And it was really interesting. It just made everything kind of hum. It's got nothing to do with like Slack or Teams. It's like none of that stuff, right? It's actually
Zoom.
It's got nothing to do with technology. It's all about habits, right? It's probably one of those early precursors to all these books about habits now. But it's about the habits of a company and how to build that in a way that works for growth. And I found that really helpful as someone who didn't know what to do. And I didn't have a board or anything like that to tell me, or advisors and mentors in that way. So that was that book. And then the last one for me is it's actually not about a book. I read good journalism. I think I think long form news, people who don't just write the news like that's breaking news, like knowing something happened. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about good analysis of things that come out regularly. So instead of reading the daily internet, find a weekly or monthly publication whose editor you think is kind of cool. When they interpret the world for you. So I have a couple of publications where I consume them very regularly with a lot of vigor because I think they do the work for me in terms of everything that's gone on in the world. But the most important things for you to know this week, if you care about either this geography or this issue, I think you got to find your editor, which is generally a publication, but and I think if you pick them, it's really helpful as an entrepreneur because you got to know about the world, and it's a really good way to do it. So those are my three.
So do you mind sharing any of the editors that you like or you read most of their work?
Yeah. So it's more publications. So, yeah, I think I've always been largely a fan of The Economist. It's super dense, but I find their sort of synthesis of the world pretty good. And then I would say someone else who I've always enjoyed is Fareed Zakaria on CNN. I don't know if you've ever seen his weekly stuff. So he produces something called GPS every week, and it's a political analysis of the world. But I've always enjoyed his perspective, and I feel like, okay, yeah, there's stuff about like geopolitics that I would never have interpreted or thought of, and it's like a crash course, like, oh, that's what's happening between like China and everybody, or those sorts of things. So yeah, I think maybe the point about those are global perspectives, which I think you've got to have an understanding of what's happening globally. And then just choose news sources that are different to you. So I very intentionally watch Al Jazeera, no other news channel, because it's the only one that I feel is like it's the least biased of all the westernized opinion. It's still westernized to some degree, Al Jazeera in English, because of some things. But like I just find it so healthy to kind of go, oh, actually, if you're not completely kind of westernized, like this is a viewpoint that's a bit more. So I think you must choose carefully, and those are my choices.
Well, thank you for sharing them, and I hope people can start reading too, right? Because nowadays, Instagram captions are better than a long article or a long a long article, a long publication that someone wrote, probably, I don't know, on Medium or any other channel, right? Because it's hard for people to concentrate nowadays, and it's like you want things summarized to like 5 lines, and that's the whole news for us.
Completely.
Is there any question that I didn't ask you that you think I should have asked you?
Oh, wow. Do you have any advice for young people leaving school right now? That would be the question I would want to be asked.
So, Josh, do you have any advice for young people leaving school right now?
Yes.
Great, let's hear it.
So I just I'm sure you've all seen on Twitter this idea of do your own research before making investment decisions in stupid things like cryptocurrency and NFTs. Do your own research. I think there are a lot of opportunities for young people, but they're not seeing them because they're not doing their own research. They're trusting very traditional systems of knowledge, the school systems they're in, the parents they have, the friends they have. And I would really encourage someone who's in high school or university right now to do your own research about where the opportunities really are. This is information that is accessible to you. How to navigate your way to these opportunities, and trust yourself to just take the step.
Doing research, navigating the opportunities, and trusting yourself to take the step.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This was so nice. I'm so glad we got to do this in person.
Likewise.
Thank you for the invitation.
I'm glad you finally made it, and it's even in person. It's way better.
Yeah, and good luck with your ALU experience. I can't wait to come and see you next year and see how you're doing. Maybe we can do this again. You can
exactly, absolutely.
Can I interview you?
Sure, that'll be great.
Okay, it's a deal. Before you graduate, I want to interview you on this platform, okay?
Sounds perfect. I'll ensure I add that on a schedule.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.